and flourished as an ecologist. After of course you did, come on, don't be too modest. Yeah. And after she finished with our MSc, she thought she needed to add a couple more syllables to her name postnomially. So she did it in Hawaii with a PhD. I believe she did it on some plant species in Western Ghats. And I believe her thesis is downloadable PDF in the Keystone website. So you guys probably should take advantage of that and read what she did. She has done a wonderful work. This Keystone, if I remember its history, is sort of offspring of Department of Ecology, or as it was now known, then it was School of Ecology. Pratim and Anita and a couple others were the brains behind it in mid-90s when they started this thing in Kotagiri. Pratim was from our first batch, 87, 89 batch. He had worked for some time in development alternatives in Delhi, then moved to Kodaikanal to work along with Palni Hills Conservation Group. And then from there, he moved further north a bit and settled in Kotagiri to start the development alternatives. So I visited them a couple of times. They're doing fantastic work in terms of enhancing livelihood of the local marginalized groups and doing conservation at the same time. It's a win-win situation. So today I believe Anita is going to talk to you guys about carriers in ecology and environment, carriers in conservation, which quite a few of you would find enlightening. So without taking too much time, over to you, Anita.
Thank you so much, Devi Prasad. It's really wonderful to be in the midst of the School of Ecology, and it's in the department. So when I was asked to speak, I did, without even thinking, I said, yes, I will, because that's been one of my commitments, that if somebody from School of Ecology reaches out, I'm not going to say no, because I owe a lot to the school. It's been definitely a turning point in my life, this MSc course and what I got out of it. So I'm happy to speak with all of you. I'm happy to meet all of you. And should we just go into my presentation? So yeah. So right. Can you see this? Is it okay? Yeah. Yeah. Just hang on. I'm just going to full screen it. Yeah.
Yeah, very good. Thank you.
Yeah. So good morning, and I'm happy to present to you my own journey. I know that the topic is careers in conservation, and I must say that I never saw my days after the course as a career chasing time. It was, I wanted to follow my passion. I wanted to do what I feel most strongly about conservation and ecology. So wherever that road took me, I was willing to go. Excuse me, I have to close the windows of my office because I'm under attack by macaques. Okay. This is part of the living in a biosphere reserve. So I'm going to talk about my own journey, and I thought that would be, and later there's lots of time for questions through which we can discuss more if needed. And this is a picture of my batch, one of my best memories of life, 2 years in Pondicherry University. I joined the course incidentally because they used to promise that in the 4th semester you could go to the Andaman Islands. That year they changed their mind and they sent us to Pichi Wildlife Sanctuary. So this is from our 3rd semester course in conservation biology. You can see Dr. Priya Davadar there. She was part of the course, teaching and being with us in the field. Dr. S. Shankar from the Kerala Forest Research Institute, who hosted us there. And part of my work from ecology was to work. Something that I learned after coming to School of Ecology was about human ecology. Because up until then, for me, ecology was birding in Sanjay Gandhi National Park because I'm from Mumbai, or going up for hikes to Canary Caves and Kandala and Lonavala. That was my idea of ecology and environment. And it was this opportunity to understand this world of human ecology, how people interact with the environment, that took me to the New Amramlam Forest in Nilambur Valley, which is part of the Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve. And I did my dissertation living and working with the Cholanaikan people. These are some old plates that I photographed from my thesis. It was a time of learning how these people lived in the forest with such low ecological footprints, living, gathering honey, catching fish in the river, trading, making things with bamboos and reeds. So this was an interesting part of life when, it's a sort of turning point when you realize there's a whole society that lives like this, that lives, and they don't have to go to a university course to learn the names of plants and animals. They know it because they live it. They live it every day of their life. So that's how I got introduced to the world of NTFP, to the world of sustainable use, to the world of traditional ecological knowledge. These are all the areas of work that I work in since then. And with this Nilgiri's, Nilambur is part of the Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve. So from Mumbai, when you come to a place that looks like this, it's very difficult to go back to Bombay. So I decided to make the Nilgiris my place of work, my place of living, and I've never regretted that decision, and I continue to live here. This is a view of the shola grasslands of the Nilgiris. Okay, so here's a little bit about Keystone Foundation. Devi was very kind to say such nice things about us. I'm not one of the founders. Pratim from the first batch, he, along with two of his friends, Snelata and Matthew, founded this organization. So right from the start, so we started Keystone in 1993, at which time I was still exploring other projects and areas in the Nilgiris. But Keystone was founded on these pillars of society, ecology, and enterprise. So right from the start, it was based, there was equal proportion of importance given to these three aspects. And I think it's really one of those few models that are out there in how to apply eco-development principles in real life. And that's what our work has been about. Over the years, the organization, these are the areas of work that the organization, that we have expertise in. Our programs are broadly divided into biodiversity, community well-being, people and nature center, archives, networks. And over the years, we also gave birth to three organizations. One is a private limited company called the Last Forest Enterprises, which looks at the marketing of organic and sustainably harvested forest produce. Similarly, the Nilgiri Natural History Society, which again is a part of our effort, is a society, membership-based society, which looks at conservation, education, and outreach. And the third, organization is the Adimalai Producer Company. Now, that's a company that is formed of all the tribal harvesters of NTFP and growers of organic food in this region. So there's about 2,000 farmers come harvesters who are members of the company and shareholders in this company. So this is like the whole ecosystem of Keystone Foundation, if I may say. this is a bit of a like very wordy kind of slide, but I wanted you to. I'm using this, and you can read up if you're interested. You could go to. We published this with some of our colleagues at Cornell University on what we do and what we do and where does it sit. So it's published in Current Conservation. That edition of Current Conservation in 2018 also features a number of our student research projects related to this program, which is the Nilgiri Field Learning Center. So over the years, what have we been trying to do? We've been trying to find a balance between several um, complementarities, as we'd like to call it. Like we're trying to bridge disciplinary, interdisciplinary kind of work. How does science and traditional ecological knowledge speak to each other? How does education, research, practice, how do the three of them work together? It's not academia for academia or research for research, but how does it communicate to practice? How do you take lessons from practice into research and education? Also, how do you go between the rural and the urban? There's much to learn in both, and many things that can be applied across both these spectrums. The other way that one of the things, how we work on health, for instance, is also about the One Health principle, where health of the body, health of the community, health of the land, all of it is interconnected. Another aspect of our work is about, yes, biodiversity, but biodiversity, cultural diversity, speaking to each other. How does this go on? And of course, this whole idea of short term and long term, because many times you can work in a project mode or you can work in a program mode. And it's very important to have both. Uh, Also, to have a long term commitment to a landscape, to be able to also break out of it and do short term, go deep, find deeper lessons, come out, stay for the long term. So these are the kinds of ways in which we work. And this poster that we made describes our work of the 30 years that Keystone has been around. This is another blog that our students write about the experience of being interns in this program. So I'd encourage you to go to these blogs and to these web resources to know more about us. We do a lot of conservation education programs involving children, involving citizens of this area. That's TNA Perumal, the famous wildlife photographer. I think this is one of his last workshops that he did with us here on campus. So we're also conscious about, when I was talking about the rural and urban, how there is a sort of audience also in the rural that we need to address. We assume that, for instance, the children in the Adivasi villages, because they grew up around forests and they grew up around nature, they interact. But things are changing because no longer do they spend time in the villages. All of them are expected to go to school, so they go to these government tribal residential schools. So the time they spend with their grandparents, with their aunts, uncles, all of that is decreasing and diminishing. So a lot of them don't even know the names of trees or birds and plants around them. So there's also a sort of going back to learning about nature that's important in rural areas. And here what you'll see is that the teachers are not us or people who are trained from outside, but they're usually the village elders, a healer, an auntie who knows a lot about wild foods. These are the kinds of people, a youth who's a very good honey hunter. These are the kind of resource people in the villages. So we call this our village elder program, where people from the village, the traditional knowledge holders, interact with their children and share their knowledge. This is an old picture, but this was a village conservation center that used to host children's programs and for the kids of that village. So yeah, a little more personal history. This is my team in 2010, a very all-male team. Again, what I learned importantly was, Devi, this is for you. Here's Suman, one of your students. And so there's also the formal and the non-formal education. Several people on my team have degrees, with several who are trained locally. There are several people who have basic literacy only. It's been interesting to work across this kind of diversity of expertise. This was in 2010. Then I took a short break from my work at Keystone to go to Hawaii. This is my professor in the middle, Tamara Tickton. So this is our lab, which was an all-woman lab. So this was in Hawaii. This was for 4 years, and I was working on the dynamics of the Canarium strictum, which is a resin-harvested species. It's endemic to the Indian subcontinent, found along the Western Ghats and parts of Northeast India. Looking at the biology of the species. I put this picture in here because this is Wildlife Week, and I understand wildlife to be both plants and animals. And here's a particularly interesting plant that we've spent several years of work on. This is Cycas circinalis. This is we helped in studying the conservation status and updated the red listing on it, and its status stands still at endangered, I believe. So very few plants across the Western Ghats, very poor understanding about its evolutionary history, therefore less regard for it, because it's of course not a timber species, so why should we care? So this kind of lack of knowledge about the special animals and plants that we have in our ecosystem also drove us to work on species of concern. And very often our program, there is a component of doing scientific and ecological research, but there's also a big component of involving the community to become barefoot ecologists or stewards of the tree. So in the background are a group of people who are harvesters of this plant. There's a market rate for the leaves. It's used in decoration. So it's also important that when they come along with you while you're doing your field work, they also understand what is it that you're looking at, what is it you're concerned about. And very often that process itself has helped to transform or to involve more of these people into the conservation of the plant also. I don't know if my psychodologist is in this group because she said she would join the group. Vandana, are you here in this forum? Well, I just wanted to, so this is Dr. Vandana Krishnamurti, who's climbing cycads, her favorite tree. So Vandana came as a student intern to Keystone Foundation, and she fell in love with the cycads that she was working with. And she went on to do her PhD on Cycas circinalis at the University of Hawaii. And I actually was her junior when it came to PhD because she went first. So this is also Vandana surveying some of the trees in Kotagiri. Vandana, are you there? I would have asked you to say something about this. No, she's not. Okay. So we're going to move on. So coming to one other point that has, by working in this kind of a landscape where there's a lot of biodiversity, there's forests interspersed with townships, there are forest villages, there are Adivasi villages inside protected areas, inside core areas. Many years ago, to a group of Sholiga children, I asked them this question, what is a good forest to you? And they immediately said a forest which has no tigers and which has no elephants. And now that's not how a good forest would look like for a biologist or an ecologist, right? But it is important in the eyes of the children who live there because they said they have a lot of memories of being attacked by these animals, of their family members being chased by them, the terror of living in environments where interactions with wildlife is almost a matter of daily life. And where is the room for this kind of a perspective in our thinking about conservation, right? And there was an interesting paper written by Bill Adams. It's called Conservation in a Mongrel World. I think that's the title of the paper. And in that he talks about this idea about how one's wilderness is another's home. And this word wilderness, which is more appropriate in the Western culture and a dangerous one to apply to inhabited land where people have a long history of occupation and rights. Conservation needs to be designed for a mongrel world, one made of ecological hybrids, not natural ecosystems in some constant state. It kind of goes against what we taught out of textbooks, but when we get out of the textbooks and we look at situations across our immediate landscapes, this is what comes at us. And I think we shouldn't be in denial. And as somebody, like the Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve is not just a place where I work, it's where my home is, this is where I live. And I know this feeling of when one's home is another's wilderness, because this is the Indian Gore, which is now roaming around our town like this is some forest. So, I mean, this is because the town has creeped into their landscapes. This would have been their ancient landscapes. Townships got built around that or usurped some of their land. So we understand this, but this is the reality of our everyday lives. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about the next couple of slides are about the work that Keystone does. And this is something we've been doing the last 5 years. We've been studying this population of wild or the Indian Gore, which is roaming around our town areas. And I think this is definitely, there's a lot of urban ecology work going around worldwide and also in our country. There's a lot of efforts to study wildlife in urban areas. And we particularly are interested in it because it's also an opportunity to involve citizen groups and community groups in the monitoring and the observation. Because the negative interactions that happen in town when these large animals are moving around can be high unless you manage it. And you can manage a protected area, it's a contained area, you have a defined, but how do you manage in an urban area where people have access, there is vehicles, there's all kinds of movements. How do you manage wildlife movement? So I'm not going to stop for questions now because I think I have only about 10 more slides. We'll finish in 15 minutes, after which we'll take time for questions, I thought. So this is about the what we think will be the wild spaces of the future. This is a picture of the Indian Gore in our landscape. This is when the Kurinji bloomed in 2018. We had another bloom of the Strobilanthus, which blooms only once in 12 years. So this is what our landscape looks like. It's at the higher altitude where our office is located, about 2,000 meters. We have tea fields adjoining shola forests. So, that's where the animal movements are now most observed. This is what a typically one of our landscapes in the town area looks like. Group of houses nestled among a very hybrid landscape of tea, plantations, grassland, shola forest, vegetable growing, wetlands, springs. It's in the midst of this diversity that human settlements can be found. This is when one of the more traditional settlements, and this is what our town areas look like. They're a bit of a holy mess because there's very little planning and regulation. There is, but it's everything congested into very small spaces and very little understanding of mountain geology, mountain hydrology, mountain ecosystems. And, very often the planning is done by engineers or, public works department based on their experiences in the lower plains. So it doesn't match. And I think this is the situation of several hill towns. So it is within these hill towns that you will have then these kind of interactions. And today this Indian Gore is like a part of our lives. So I've not seen this, but Chandrasekhar, one of my colleagues who's taken all these pictures also, He says how the women, when they're plucking tea and then coming back in the evening, they just talk to the animal, say, please, can you just move away? Can you just move aside? We've got to pass. There are occasionally very bad interactions where people's lives are lost or animals' lives are lost. But by and large, on a daily basis, there's a lot of coexistence also. Yeah, this is our campus, and this is a school program that's going on campus. And here's one of my other colleagues, Sharada, who's a nature educator. She's busy taking her notes, and the Gore is roaming around. The students are happily watching. So this is part of our daily life. There also, so what is it? What is this push or pull factor? What is the push out of forest areas? What is the pull towards urban areas? Often we think it could be in search of water and in terms of resting spaces, because forests are also highly fragmented. The continuity is not there. And these could be reasons, possible reasons, that they come into human areas where there's lots of traffic. Sometimes you have very, really bad situations like this where I'm sure the animals walk over garbage dumps or waste dumps. And then this little calf has managed to get some plastic stuck in his hooves. And he went around for a couple of weeks like that, but fortunately, as the muscles grew, I think the plastic broke by itself. So the calf is okay, but these are the kind of avoidable situations. And these are some of the really bad kinds of situations where they fall into open wells, septic tanks, and then it's definitely negative for the animal because they don't survive such kind of injuries. And rescue operations are futile and very often not successful. Okay, so what did we do? So what we did was we've had for about 2 years local people. We identified the different herds that are there. We labeled them according to the location. We tried to track, so we have a team that does a sort of tracking of the animals at certain hours of the day and different days of the week. We're able to get sort of an estimate of how many numbers are we talking about. Because if you ask people, they say, you'll only start getting this kind of an anecdotal information. So what exactly are these numbers? How often? What is this kind of seasonality? We also are able to see that sometimes when there's a dip in one particular herd, there's a rise in others. And this, for instance, here there's a dip and then there's a rise here. This could be times when the herds are sort of together. There could be things that are happening there that, and also one of the interesting things is that there's a lot more opportunity to study behavior because you're able to track the animal more easily. They're more visible. Of course, their patterns inside forests and outside of forest areas will be different. But monitoring is definitely more interesting outside of the forest areas because you have 100% chance of seeing your animal and seeing every aspect of your animal. So this is our particular herd. So basic information about where does it move, what's the ratio, what's the average herd size, births, deaths. This is the kind of information we've been able to collect. And this is what our typical herd looks like. We've also done an individual ID of all the animals that we've surveyed and tried to create a certain individual profile because we're talking about 100 animals, about 75 to 90 of them adults, 75 of them adults. So, this kind of baseline that we're able to do along with communities has another advantage because it also gets people to understand what are you doing in the name of research? What is this research about? What is this study about? What is it going to yield? What are you looking at? So I think this helps to demystify some of the scientific methods. It also helps to have conversations with communities and people living around situations like this to explain to them. And I think in the long term, it has had a positive impact on the way people behave. There's a lot more sensitivity in this landscape. There's a lot more coexistence going on here. There's not that animosity towards the animal. and there's a healthy kind of co-living that's happening here. Yeah, again, our we monitor the birth that we're also able to get fairly robust information about their different behavioral patterns through the year. Yeah. And this is something that, also we're able to, and again, I say, when we're monitoring them in urban environments, just because of the ease of monitoring, you're also able to see certain kinds of behavior that I think has yet not been recorded elsewhere. Like often you'd have heard of how the elephants return to a buried animal. If one of them has been buried, you've seen this kind of a group mourning or a sort of visiting of the burial site. And we happened to see this, Chandrasekhar noticed this happening with the Gore. There was an adult Gore that died of natural causes and was buried in the tea field. For a couple of days, the herd that Gore used to hang out with would visit this particular burial site for a couple of days. And I think this is something that probably hasn't been recorded in Gore behavior before. So in the urban, and especially urban like ours, where we are located within a biosphere reserve, where we are interacting all the time. So the Gore is relatively, well, it's not relatively easier. It's difficult because it has its own challenges. The elephants, there's also the large cats that are around here. And very often it's the poor leopards that get caught into a lot of snares that are kept for wild boar or other smaller animals that farmers are not happy with. And these are unfortunate incidences that happen around here. And we hope that by building our citizen wildlife program, we can stop such incidences from happening and we can promote more coexistence. So yeah, citizen science is a big part of our work, and we find there's a lot of, it's a powerful tool which can lead to very active and long-term conservation. Some of the work that we do then with the Gore, the action part of it, just alerting people to where is the possibility of the animal being has been a good effort to avoid any kinds of sudden negative interactions. Yeah, and setting up um, little ways to monitor, putting up this bug impression pad near one of our fences behind our house to just find out what animals catching, getting a leopard's imprint is also one way of monitoring and engaging local people. Um, we've learned over the years partnerships are important. We work a lot with the forest department. This is some part of my team. We work to share information, to work together, because I think there's a lot we can do if we can strike that partnership level. So this is my last slide, and I'd like to end that yes, we do conservation, and we do conservation, and we are an NGO. We work in issues of eco-development. We work with people. We work with forests where people live. And it's also largely, this is a quote from a renowned wildlife biologist, Nigel Leader Williams, where he says in one of his papers, he says, conservation, we've often seen we've approached conservation as if it's a scientific problem that needs to be sorted. But if we start to look at it as a social process that engages science, we might have more success, was what Nigel Leader Williams says. And I think it sort of sums up what approach we take to conservation here in Keystone. And with this, I'd like to end my talk, close my talk, and open up for questions and discussions and anything that you have.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
May I
Yes,
stop
ma'am. Thank you
sharing?
so much.
Yeah. Okay.
For
Yeah,
Yes, and
thank
after
you.
discussing so much about starting from your journey to to the present work, it's really
Mm-hmm.
interesting. There are a few questions, ma'am. Should I read out for you, ma'am?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
because I might miss the order
yeah,
of
yeah,
the questions,
yeah, yeah,
so
yeah.
it's
I'll
better
just read it out for
if you
you.
help me with that. Yeah,
Yeah,
thank
yeah.
you.
So first is Samiha's question. With respect to
Mm-hmm.
COVID-19, what
Mm-hmm.
scope do people who have just started their career in wildlife conservation have in India during the next year?
Mm-hmm.
Second question is, what do you think would make someone stand out as an ideal candidate when the competition for a job is even higher now?
Okay, so with relation to COVID and wildlife work, this has been a question several people are asking. I think never more has it been important to the world that work on biodiversity and conservation. So I think you should see it as a huge opportunity because there's a lot more awareness that we need to do more conservation, that there is a need to do this kind of action-oriented work. So though it might seem that the policies are not pushing for it, there is also an understanding that biodiversity loss has what has led us to the pandemic, right? So how do we address these kind of issues? So in that light, I would say that, for instance, a lot of the work that we need to do is field based. And if you are located in the field, then no pandemic can really stop you. And I think that opportunity to work is higher if you're a field based organization. It's a bit of a problem if you are a sort of, head office is in Bangalore and I have my field center in the Nilgiris, or my head office is in Chennai and I have a field office in say. So as for field-based organizations, I think they're ideally placed to work. In terms of jobs, yeah, which is why I said at the beginning, I don't know if I'm the right person for a career conversation because I feel what I look for people is like their passion. They're wanting to do something independently and they're wanting to make some kind of real change. And that real change means giving it some time, giving it a kind of longer term commitment. I'm not saying that I want people who say they'll stay here for 5 years or 10 years. That's not the thing. That I'm engaged in this um, mission or this question for a longer time. And whether I do it in the Nilgiris or in other, but I, when people are clear about what they want to work on, sometimes they're not clear on what they want to work, but they also want to give it the time to learn. I think that's very important. So not to see it as for my case specifically, not to see it as a job, but to see it as something that you want to work on to bring real change, that would be attractive to me. Right? I hope I've answered your question. Okay.
Okay, ma'am. So the next question is by Indushri.
Hmm.
Ma'am, could you mention some notable works that involved citizen science for conservation in your career and
Hmm.
how you convinced the common people to do it?
Yeah, well, I think common people to do it was not a problem at all because when you're doing a citizen science or a community-based program, you're also asking people to do something right in their backyards, right? So in areas where they're familiar. So the challenge wasn't in getting people to participate or give their time and volunteer for this. The challenge was in making people who can take decisions, policymakers, to listen to the evidence, to make decisions based on what people's observations were. So the challenge was really at that end. And that's something that we are working and that is work in progress.
Okay, ma'am. So this third question is by Rahul.
Mhm.
I was reading about the emergence of the new ecology, work emerging from the ecological anthropology, political ecology, environmental and ecological
Mhm.
economics.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
can we pursue the ecology and social sciences together?
Yeah.
Any specific discipline or opportunities available, etc.?
Yeah. So I think yeah, unfortunately, I'm not so aware of the programs in our own country, but I know that a lot of programs, either in the United States or in UK or in parts of Europe, have a lot more interdisciplinarity to the ecology work, where you have, cutting across natural resource management, across humanities. So this whole area of environmental humanities, political ecology, it sits within departments that are working on a more interdisciplinary way. You can find them in departments of geography, in departments of ecology, across different universities. But the environmental humanities is getting more closer to what I think we are doing here in Keystone, where there's room for social sciences and natural sciences to work together, to design research questions together. Hmm?
Okay, ma'am. So, next question is by Dilip. Hi, ma'am. How would you say the conservation of the rich plant wealth in Western Ghats is progressing?
Mm-hmm.
The second question is, can you talk on your work as a chair of IUCN SSC Western Ghats Plant Specialist Group?
Thank you. Yes. Um, So as you know, there's a lot of work on the Western Ghats is a very well studied area, and there's a lot of we're not working in a vacuum there. Right from the environmental protection movements that started from a lot of colleges, basic forestry colleges, colleges of botany and zoology. There's a lot of active nature-oriented work. I myself am a product of that. I came from a Bhavan's College BSc zoology program to move towards ecology. And that's essentially because of the Western Ghats and all the people that are out there in the Western Ghats. Having said that, what I found was what happens is when a lot of us work in very isolated pockets, we work within our state boundaries, we work within our district boundaries. And that's not the way to assess the conservation status of any species. You have to look at biogeographical boundaries. And what I found is that there was no coordination in that realm. Like, somebody sitting in Kerala has the assessment of a plant or an animal or an insect or an amphibian or a herb. And that same species is found a little further into Goa or Gujarat or Maharashtra. And that forum is lacking where scientists could collaborate across boundaries. And the IUCN Red List, I found that what happens is, like, if there is a question in Parliament also regarding any species, they immediately will say, go into the red list and check what is the status. One, because that kind of a database is easily acceptable. It has a certain recognition and renowned status. And therefore, it has a sort of ease of access. And very often, policymakers and decision makers are using that website. But if you go there and see, the status of several of our species is poorly assessed, is wrongly assessed sometimes. And that's not because of the fault of anybody else. It's only because of the way there is no coordinated effort to bring the information together and to present it in a sort of more cohesive manner. And I've been with the IUCN network because Keystone is a member of the IUCN, and I'm representing Keystone in that forum. And I saw all of this and I thought, it's high time that we have something. But I know that India is too large a subcontinent and too many experts and lots of people, working on same issues. So for starters, we said, let's start with a smaller region. And that's where we came upon the idea of working on the Western Ghats. It's an effort to bring together plant taxonomists, ecologists, conservation, naturalists, anybody who's working on plant conservation. We want to bring them together to see how we can work in a more coordinated manner. And we will be using the protocol that's designated by the red list assessments so that we can have one kind of protocol when we are doing the assessments. Having said this, I want to offer all of you students an opportunity. If you are interested in, so the red listing is not just about plants, it's right about every form of life. And so I would encourage you to get in touch with me if you're interested in learning more about this and how we could do an online. There is an online module that's available. I myself, I'm undertaking this module to learn how to do assessments. I find it very interesting, and I would encourage all of you to do this also and to take up this online training to be able to carry forward the work of plant assessments. I got a bit distracted because I saw my good friend Vandana here. Hi, Vandana. She's also an alumni. I think Devi would remember her. I used the slide of the cyclists and I showed you climbing trees. I hoped you would be there and tell your own story. But anyway, it's good to see you, Vandana. So this is the work of the IUCN Plant Specialist Group. We've just started out, and I would encourage students to get in touch with us. We can take you through this training program and get you all on board to be assessors and to work on databases. Yeah.
Welcome, Vandana. So you took a break from gardening on top of buildings, huh?
You needed to hear that, right, Vandana?
Hi, sir. I'm here. I'm here.
Yeah, Vandana, I just told them about how, you came in as a student intern with worked with me, and then I came as your junior to do a PhD in Hawaii.
Yes, I was a senior and I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Great. Okay. And there's Ramamurthy saying hi. Great, great. Okay. Sorry for those interruptions, but it's
No
good to
problem,
see
ma'am.
good trends.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
So the next question is by Priyanka. Hi, ma'am. Are there any works on natural dyes by your foundation?
Priyanka, we don't have any direct work on natural dyes, but I recently saw from the Forest College in Metupalayam, I know a professor, Dr. K. Kumaran, who's been working on anato dyes for a long time. And he's been doing some serious work, at least I've known him for 20 years, and he's quite keen. So you might like to get in touch with him and find out more. Okay.
Anita, just a brief interruption from me. I think I should introduce Vandana a bit more to the kids because,
Please.
guys, Vandana is entrepreneur in her own right. She runs an organization called Urban Mali in Bangalore, which advocates gardening in a city. And she is doing extraordinarily well, so well that she needs an accountant, whom she had advertised for, right? So that should give you an idea how well she is doing. I'm well up on gossip, Anita, okay?
I found an accountant, sir.
So you guys can ask questions on career to Vandana as well, right?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. Actually, you guys should have her do one of the webinars, because I think it's a very good entrepreneurial model that Vandana has initiated. And I think she should also be definitely speaking to all of you.
Sure, ma'am.
Yeah.
We'll have Vandana ma'am future
Yes.
in future.
Yeah.
Okay. The
Thank
next
you for roping me in. As usual, this is what you do.
Volunteer other people.
But really wonderful, what all of you all are doing. I'm so inspired. I mean, when we were in Pondi in doing our masters, we sort of it was such an inspiring time because just being in the campus was so exciting, and I see that so much has happened, and this year's Wildlife Week is super inspiring and lovely that you all have taken on the online medium to really make use of it and have so many people on board. I wish I was in school actually. That's how much fun it looks like. So great going, guys.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
All right.
Should I go to the next question, ma'am?
Okay, if there,
Yeah.
there is more. Okay.
Okay. Sanjay, this next question is by Sanjay.
Okay.
Insightful and colorful presentation, ma'am.
Thank you.
Almost like visiting a forest.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for it. And I have some basic questions as an amateur. By and large, can you please share broader functions those exist in conservation if I consider it as a sector? His second question is, does creative communications one of those functions? His third question is, if so, how many organizations in India focuses on this function as much as research or fundraising or data collection or technology?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for the question, Sanjay. So, when you look at the work of conservation, very often I think the work got delayed in our country because we were always thinking we need a certain kind of expertise and only then can you do conservation. But I think over the years we have also evolved and we've understood that to do conservation, we need to get a wide variety, a much more diversity in this work. So you need your biologists who can do the research, but you also need citizens who can participate in that research. You need to communicate those research results much faster, much more creatively. You need to have more education programs. You need to have conservation planning, conservation action, all of these things into curriculum. So you have to also have a certain amount of teaching expertise. So in several ways, I think depending on where you can if you look at myself, I took a decision based on, I think I fell in love with the landscape, and then I reached an organization that was actually that had this exact mix of things that I was looking for, the bridge between society, ecology, and enterprise. I learned only after coming here. So I think when you reach a stage where you see it's a place that you would like to give some time to, it's a team that you can work with, then you start carving out your space for conservation. You start making it. So I don't, there are definitely, so I think we should explore how conservation, what are the other ways that we can do conservation? So it's not that only research is the way that we do conservation. Yeah. And in terms of how many organizations focus on this and research and funding, I think I'm really not the directory of such a thing, but I would say wherever you go, you make it your mandate to do conservation. And that's the approach you should take. And there will be scope and there will be room to do it, in whatever spaces you are. Right?
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay. Yeah.
The next question is by Ajit. In the light of evolution, human presence in wildlife area is rather new. As a species, humans are new to the world with respect to other wild animals like elephants and wild Gore. My question is coexistence really possible? Is it too early? Management would means humans to change certain habits on a long-term basis.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, I think we have to, while I agree that in an evolutionary timescale, human presence is minuscule, but it is several thousands of years old. Yeah. For instance, if you even take the discussion on use of fire to manipulate landscapes. Uh, Recently, I was listening to a talk by Shonil Bhagwat, who works on sacred groves in India. He's at Oxford, and he's a researcher you might like to read. And his research shows that, how the Western Ghats was at least has a 4,000-year old history of being manipulated by fire, agriculture, forests, this mosaic, how it went on. So, and in that light, how something like sacred groves, the evidence shows that it could only have been something like 400 to 500 years old. Yeah, I don't want to rake up anything controversial here now, but we've got to look at this human presence and what it has done. And I don't see human presence as outside of the system. I think human presence is part of the system. So, this thing of is coexistence possible? I think coexistence has been the way, and we've failed to understand it. We've come with if you read this paper by Georgina Mace, which is titled "Whose Conservation?" She traces a history of the conservation ethos, and it's only in 100 years, not even 100 years, a 50-year history shows every decade we either thought of it as nature without people, nature despite people, um, till we came to their nature for people, and finally we're at this people and nature together. So I think it's a sort of coexistence. We're finally beginning to understand that coexistence was probably already there. And how much we have understood of it is, I think, what is the shortfall. And so if I look at a landscape like this, nobody in this landscape says, take all the gore and throw them out or shoot them. No, they don't say that. The first thing people say is, we are in their landscape. They are looking for water. They're looking for grass. There is a certain human. There's a certain empathy. There's a certain kind of understanding that there's a trade-off that's happened here. So I think we have to also look with a little bit more openness towards this coexistence model, right? Okay, so that's my take on it.
Okay, ma'am.
I
The
see
next
it.
question is by
Vishnu.
Vishnu.
Yeah.
Excellent example of coexistence. Thank you for the enlightenment. How well the avifaunal study has done in Nilgiris? Is there any research going on under Keystone Foundation?
We haven't taken up any long-term avifaunal studies. We've just had student interns come and document, diversity. But I know that I think Robin Vijayan's lab from ISA Tirupati has set up a long-term station here in Kotagiri. And Robin himself, because we have these interesting protected shola areas here, where there's been such a high diversity of endemism in avifauna. Robin's research was here, and I think there is a long-term monitoring that he set up. But having said that, every day I'm amazed, because I used to spend all my Sundays when I was doing my BSc running to Sanjay Gandhi National Park to see some birds. And here I just have it in my backyard, like, all those endemics. I have the verditor, I have the Nilgiri flycatchers, and the Kashmiri flycatcher comes. It's a winter visitor. So there's a lot of interesting avifaunal diversity in this area, but we haven't documented it in an organized way as yet.
Okay, ma'am.
Right?
So
Okay.
the next question is by Mary. I have visited Kotagiri once, where we saw herds while down the hill to Coimbatore. It's eye-catching to see them graze calmly. Happy listening to the session. Thank you, Anita, ma'am. I'm working in an international school. Any ideas or influence that I can share with my students, particularly to make them aware of saving the nature?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of resources, and thanks to this digital world, more resources are now available virtually. So there's definitely a lot more education material. And mainly I feel, Mary, if you have the passion for it, and if you are keen on it, then your students will also imbibe it from you, and you will find your way of making this as a curriculum. And If you're interested particularly on the Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve, we've created a teaching manual which talks about the Biosphere Reserve. It's a manual for teachers. I'm happy to share more details of it, and if you would like to get a copy, send it to you. So you can mail me your address. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. All right.
So,
If there
Priyanka
are,
is asking for registration link training in the assessment. I think it's related to the previous question.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
I would
sure.
request Priyanka to mail ma'am.
Yeah,
It's
please
we
do,
have already
please.
shared her mail ID, so you can take her.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
You can mail her. The
Yeah,
next
please.
question is by Shivani.
Mm-hmm.
Ma'am, how to include more of the urban population with a higher population density to act more for conservation?
Yeah. I think mm, I think there's a lot of work happening in urban areas. And if you look at any of the cities, there's a lot of work happening. So I think the opportunity for involving urban populations is high. Sometimes I feel we've got to be sensitive to the different layers of that society, because sometimes our programs are targeted at one kind who are either English speaking or tech savvy. So we've got to be looking at different sectors within that mosaic that the urban provides us. And there are lots of opportunities. Personally, I found monitoring, to start on some kind of a observational monitoring program, the best way to start off. That's been my, I know that, for instance, lots of citizen groups also start by, let's go clean up a wetland, let's go plant some species. Action also works. I've been a great champion of monitoring. So when I start, I usually start with monitoring programs. So this is one piece of advice. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am.
Right.
So
Yeah.
before I go to the last question, yeah, I have
Hmm.
one personal question, ma'am. Actually, what are the opportunities for outside India for doing PhD or career opportunities?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just want to put in this red list training. So I just posted the link for the red list training up there. It's called conservation training courses. So yeah, to your question about opportunities abroad for PhD, uh,
Yes, and
I
maybe
think
jobs or yeah. It's a
I
very common question. I think many of them are thinking. So I asked on behalf of all of them.
yeah, yeah. So I will, okay, maybe I should also share that, I'm from the fourth batch. Even in my batch, if you look at it, the ready route was to finish this, put in your GREs, look at those programs in either in the mostly in the United States or in the UK that you want to go for, and to pursue it and get out there and do an academic program. But as you'll see also in the case of Vandana, myself, I took longer. But I see a lot more people spending some time getting your hands a little dirty with some work, getting some mud on your boots, yeah, getting your hands into some actual work on the ground. Because I find when you do that, you're able to write, uh, uh, write a question, write an SOP, write a better um, sort of visionary kind of question that, or a problem statement that you want to work on. So I would advise, oh, that I think is a good model, is to work for some period of time in a landscape, in an NGO, in a research institute, gain some field experiences, and then go for the program that you would like to apply to.
Sure, ma'am.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
yeah.
So there's a question from Olivia. Ma'am, I'm
Yeah.
interested in population dynamics. What
Mm-hmm.
are the prospects or
Mm.
scopes? What can I do in that field?
Mhm. Okay. Yeah, so that's been my interest too. And I work with NTFP species, and I've been very keen on assessing, looking at their populations. This lab that Vandana and I worked in Hawaii, Tamara Tickton is one of the best in the world in terms of vegetation dynamics, especially of plants that are used by people. Otherwise, also, I mean, there are enough ecologists in the department. Priya Davida would also be able to guide you in terms of studying population dynamics. Yeah, so I think, has that answered your question? Yeah, I think it's definitely a field that has a lot of scope for research and for teaching, and it's something that you should take up. And let me just say that it's not only teaching and research that you can do after a really good knowledge about how to assess populations and to study populations. It's an important area of work when you're coming to things like restoration, when you're looking at things like managing invasive species. So that's where I think population dynamics really matter. So it has an whole action component also, which you could be um, interested in.
Okay, there's another question. Man, being from Himalaya, Meghalaya, sorry.
Meghalaya.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Being from Meghalaya and having worked in Arunachal Pradesh for 2 years,
Yes.
I have come across numerous negative human-wildlife interactions on account of palate preferences, cultural obligations, conflicts, education, etc. Many are not convinced on conservation science. So, could you suggest some approaches one could try to get more common people to take part? And
Yeah.
how does one tackle controversial issues like hunting and conflicts?
Yeah. So, Joannika, about even 10 years ago, these would be very taboo topics. Yeah, people wouldn't even talk about it in India. But today, there's a lot more openness and a lot more understanding. And there's also a lot of understanding that because when we went as conservation biologists, we went in there with this whole thing, I'm here to save the species. So I don't care about your culture. I think what you're doing is wrong. When we went in with that, we also did not get the community's buy-in. We didn't really get an understanding of the problem. Today, if you see, there's a lot more ecologists working on, especially from the environmental humanities. You might look at the work of Ambika Ayadurai. You might look at the work of Meera Anna Uman. These are people who've been writing now and writing in several forums about how there is a huge use of animal products and animals for food, animals for medicine, for healing, and how without having the community participate in this, just a simple ban is not going to solve the problem. So how can we negotiate these spaces? So you could have a look at Ambika Ayadurai's writing. She's from the Wildlife Institute of India and now teaches a social science program at IIT Gandhinagar. There's Meera Anna Uman from the Dakshin Foundation, who writes a lot about hunting practices in the islands and along the coast. So there's a lot of writing from India that's coming up that you should probably read. And I would like to say that there's a whole body of work in the realm of sustainable use. And sustainable use also talks about food diversity, uncultivated foods, food from forests. So all of that are areas where people are talking about being more open to these kind of uses. And of course, it's a little difficult topic because the Wildlife Protection Act has no room for this discussion. It is seen as an offense. So how do we still approach it? How do we work it? It may be a new area that's opening up in our country's research work, is what I feel.
Okay, ma'am. So the next question is, ma'am, is there any internship program that your foundation offers to the people who are interested? It's from Balfour has asked this question.
Yeah. Uh, well, we don't have any structured internship programs. We, especially, we are a little partial to Salim Ali School students. I've rarely said no to them. So do write in but one thing is to go to the website and see the different kinds of work and themes that we're working on. So if you write in with a kind of specific kind of theme, I can direct you to somebody who might be open for an internship.
Okay, ma'am. So next question is by Ajit. Could you please shed some light on science communications, writing especially?
Hmm. So I think, I mean, I think one of the reasons I also went for a PhD so late in my life was because there's a lot of information that you collect, and it's when you're in a field-based organization, an NGO, you really don't set aside time to write and to communicate those results. And that I found as lacking, which was also pointed out to me by several mentors of mine. So it is really important that we communicate. Writing is one way we communicate. Writing in the regional media is definitely that we need to pay more attention to. Writing for different audiences is something that we need to. And I think I've seen that in Bangalore, and NCBS offers quite a few interesting writing workshops. I would encourage, if any of you come across those, to take that up and to go for it. And I think look beyond writing. Look at storytelling. Look at filmmaking. Look at theater. Look at different ways of telling, of sharing these science messages. Yeah.
Okay, ma'am. So
Okay.
participants, if you have any more questions, you can drop it. Otherwise, we'll wrap up this session.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Anita, thanks a lot for a wonderful presentation
Thank you
and
so much for
good
having me.
discussion. And it was a pleasure listening to students for a change,
Yeah. Yay, we got our justice.
right?
We made you listen to
Yeah,
us.
yeah, of course. Of course, of course. Real
Yeah.
turn. Yeah. Good.
Yeah.
So it
Really.
was nice, and it was nice to have Vandana also in on the program. Good.
Mm.
Thanks a lot once again, and I hand over this back to Abhinav to wrap up.
Thank you, sir. So participants, if you have any doubts, you can contact her. We have already shared her mail ID in the chat box. And thank you, Anita ma'am, for joining us and sharing so much information. And also to our alumni, Vandana ma'am. Thanks to our faculty coordinator, Devi Prasad sir, our faculty members, Dr. Sundar Pandyan sir, Ramamurthy sir, Dr. Gurjeet ma'am, and our HOD professor, Jayakumar sir, and all the participants for joining. Thank you so much. Uh, we had a wonderful day, and tomorrow we'll see you again with another new session. Thank you so much.
Happy madam, wish you all the very best. Best wishes to Vandana madam. Welcome madam.